Hello, my name is Arthur Veloso Nepomuceno da Silva, and I will present my honors research project for you. The main purpose of my research project is to systematically analyze the impacts of immigration laws and policies towards the Latin American community since the beginning of the 20th century. I did a literature review, and I collected substantial facts about important historical events reported in books, articles, videos, and news reports. I focus on the facts, and I could interpret these historical events and compare and contrast them with the recent human rights violations done by the immigration system towards the Latinx community. My research question is, how do some immigration laws and policies systematically contribute to socioeconomic inequality and racial discrimination towards the Latin American immigrants in the United States? I did one literature review, that is the book Wherever There Is a Fight by Elaine Ellison. And the book is about history of civil liberties advocated by progressive groups in California. In the second chapter, Elaine Ellison presents a clear exposition of historical facts that the immigrant community in California have been faced. She presents a multiracial report about some immigration policies that have been created, justified, and enforced in California. She presents the impacts of these policies on the immigrant communities. And just to exemplify, she explains how the Asian American community before the 1900s have suffered from segregation policies. And then she explains how after the 1900s, racial discrimination towards the Mexican community was developed. The historical facts presented in this book inspired my research project. My methodology is quite simple. I read the book Wherever There Is a Fight. I also read the book Decade of Betrayal, Mexican Repatriation in 1930s. And then I read the USCIS article and an interview of the author of the Decade of Betrayal, Mexican Repatriation in 1930s. I used those books and articles and interviews to create a historic timeline with the events to further analyze them afterwards. Then, when it comes to the contemporarity, I researched on reliable news report videos from The Guardian, the CNN News, and the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. After collecting all the information, I connected the dots between the past and the present and how the American history has contributed to the perpetration of racial discrimination, socioeconomic exploitation, and dehumanization of the Latinx community. So let's begin. First, I will talk about the repatriation. This is the historic background. It started in 1914, basically with the World War First. American had a shortage of labor, and because of that shortage, the United States of America facilitated the importation of Mexican labor to work in private ranches and farms. After the war, in 1918, Mexican workers remained in the United States, and the Associated Farmers, a conservative group, continued to recruit Mexican laborers. In 1929, the Great Depression happened and the US economy crashed. Many people found themselves unemployed as a result of it. Between 1929 and 1931, under the banner of saving jobs for, quote, real Americans, unquote, the federal government led a massive repatriation effort to deport Mexicans with no distinction made for their legal status. Visa rules were tightened, reducing legal immigration. Just to have a notion about the impact of these policies, in 1925, there were around 60,000 legal immigrants from Mexico. In 1931, the number dropped to around 3,000 immigrants. Private companies refused to hire non-citizens, and this blacklisting quickly extended to all people of Mexican origin, regardless of citizenship. One quote from George Clement of the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce. It is the most remarkable from this era. The slogan has gone out over the city, and it is being adhered to. Employ no Mexicans while white man is unemployed. It is a question of pigment, not a question of citizenship or right. Well, that's very compelling. In 1930, the Bureau of Immigration was under the responsibility of the Department of Labor, and the Secretary of Labor in 1930 launched a program of mass immigration raids to remove immigrants from the job market. The immigration agents conducted random surprise inspections of boarding houses, restaurants, and pool rooms, entering without warrants and rounding up people based solely on the color of their skin. In February 26, 1931, a mass raid was conducted on La Placita, the city plaza in Los Angeles. 11 Mexicans were arrested as a result of it, and it was basically like that. The immigration officers, they blocked the street exits, and every person that was located in the La Placita had to line up and to present their documents. Otherwise, they would be, arrested and sent to Mexico. The historical background between 1931 and 1939. Subsequent raids were happening, and the government officials basically focused on Hispanic and Latino communities, and they basically were using the racial profiling to aim the Latin American community. County administrators, they calculated that would cost less to transport people to Mexico instead of like keeping them in detention facilities. So they start doing like mass transportation by train to Mexico. Between 1931 and 1934, the Los Angeles Department of Charities launched 15 special train loads, averaging 1,000 patriatos each. And the Los Angeles Board of Supervisors, they calculated that they saved with these actions around $347,468 in relief payments for one train load. From 1930 to 1939, the Mexicans were around 46.3% of all people deported in the United States. Yet, they comprised less than 1% of the population. The author of the book, Decade of Betrayal, Francisco Valderrama, said 60% of those deported were US citizens. Then we have another scenario very similar to the repatriation, that is the Bracero program. It started the historic background started in 1939 when the World War II was happening. The repatriation program ceased, and the United States again had a labor shortage because of the war. And in 1942, the US government began negotiations with Mexico to bring workers from the impoverished Mexican countryside to work in the US agriculture and railroads. On April 26, 1943, the United States and Mexico finalized the Bracero Treaty, under which the United States government became the Braceros' official employer. Over the course of 2 decades, an estimated 2 million Braceros would come to the United States. Agribusiness welcomed the Braceros as a replacement for domestic workers' efforts to build unions. Under the Bracero Treaty, workers were guaranteed steady wages, housing, and health services during the 45-day period of their working contracts, contrasting with the terrible working conditions. 10% of their gross wages would be deducted and put into a savings fund, although many Brazilians were not told why this money was taken from their paychecks and how to claim it upon they return to Mexico. After the allotted time of employment, Brazilians were required to return to Mexico for a new contract. However, many stayed, which led the Immigration Naturalization Service to deport Mexicans under the program called Operation Wetback. In 1962, the Congress brought Brazilians under the minimum wage protections, and this made the program less profitable for the growers. In the Brazil program ended as a result in 1964, 2 years after the minimum wage protections being placed. Here we can see the dehumanization that this group of people have been faced. They were treated like something below the human standards. And after I present those historical events, let's make a historical analysis of the facts. The repatriation, the Brazil program are examples of how American immigration system was used as a creator of socio-economic inequality, targeting Mexican and Mexican-American communities. According to Greenkirk and Margot Okazawa-Hay, maintaining the system of inequality requires the objectification and dehumanization of subordinated peoples. Their concept applies to both historical moments because in the repatriation, the justification to deport Mexican-like individuals was to keep jobs for real Americans, the white Americans. The dominant group used narratives associating skin color to citizenship. Having racist ideologies as a justification, outrageous immigration policies and operations were used to concentrate power and privilege to the racial dominant group to the detriment of the subordinated group. The Brazil program, the racist language is not as explicit as during the repatriation. However, the systemic dehumanization of Mexican workers is present when the purpose of that program was to exploit immigrant labor, having the immigration system as a weapon to force the collective alienation of basic human rights. Now we are going to talk about the contemporary human rights violations towards the Latinx community. We have three main examples of human rights violations. First, it starts with hate speech. The most classic example is Donald Trump's speech.
Now, on immigration, in the poll, that was an area of weakness for you. You have been widely criticized, Donald, as you know, for offending immigrants in your announcement speech. I want to just play again exactly what you said in that speech. Here you are.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
Now, you've tried to clarify this statement in recent days, Donald, but I guess the question comes down to this. Do you regret saying that specifically about rapists, or do you stand by it?
No, not at all. Of course, it's not only Mexico. If you let that run a little bit longer, it talks about people coming from all over. They're coming from all over. They'll soon be coming, and probably already have, be coming from all over the world.
Well, another example is the family separation that happened at the U.S. border with Mexico.
¿De dónde son ustedes? ¿Y tú?
Guatemala.
No llores.
It is important to mention that In the family separation program, some children were held in cages like dogs, cats, and other animals. That that's terrible. The ICE illegal operations. This happened in Los Angeles. Well, another sad reality for the Latin American immigrants in the United States. Let's make an analysis of these facts. The hate speech used by the ex-president Donald Trump, it is a clear example of how narratives are created to maintain a system of racial oppression and inequality. By telling what he tells in a public stand, he creates a narrative that all Mexican and other Latino immigrants are all criminals. The main objective of this action is to legitimate a political persecution of vulnerable communities, embedded in the most explicit manifestation of racism. Immigration laws and policies that allow the family separation and the ICE illegal operations are shaped around these racist narratives to systematically enforce inequality and marginalization of the Latinx community under the banner Americans First. Like what happened during the repatriation and the Braceros program, today Latinx people are victims of a structural racism that subjugate them to a third-class position in the American society, allowing the most terrible means of persecution to happen. And that's my work cited. My future research will be about police brutality and the ways that it happened, who are the victims, how the process started, how to overcome this chronic issue. As a paralegal student myself, I love legal area topics and I plan to pursue that. I want to thank Professor Mustafa Popal for being so much supportive to me during this research project. It has been very challenging process, and he did that very didactically explained to me about how to do a research step by step. He encouraged me during the toughest moments in this semester, and I hope I can make future researches with him in order to greatly impact our community.